Kalechman for Millennium, and today I'd like to address two important dates in the history of the United States Marine Corps and the United States of America. One date, August 20th, is very important and very dear to most of us, and those of us that are students of history and students of the United States of America. And that's August 20th. Now, on August 20th, 1945, the Japanese Imperial Government, Imperial Army, Navy, surrendered to the United States of America unconditionally after the Marines had landed at Okinawa, and many Marines were preparing to go into the island of Japan, the fortress. And there were many fanatical Japanese military people that vowed it would never happen. But let me assure you one thing. The United States Marine Corps does not go back on their word. We took an oath that we would go into Japan, and we were ready to go in. And we went in as occupiers. And the other important date that more or less turned around the whole Pacific War, or the whole war, and turned it into a defensive war for the Japanese rather than an offensive war, which they were raving havoc on us in the Philippines and throughout the South Pacific. And at the time, they were a dire threat to the Australians' government and the Australian people. And now we have to remember, during World War II, Australia, being a commonwealth of the United Kingdom, England, their troops were all committed in North Africa. They were serving in the 8th Army, English 8th Army. And they were in North Africa. So there was no way they could pull them out and then take them down into Pacific, retrain them, and then send them out. So more or less the responsibility was left to General MacArthur and the United States Marine Corps. And the first thing that was done was the United States Navy committed the Marine Corps to an island in the South Pacific that nobody ever heard of before, and that was called Guadalcanal. Now, what I like to do is, rather than tell you about it, I want to take the time to show you where Guadalcanal is in the World Atlas, to give you an idea of how far away it was and how far Marines and naval personnel and Army had to go to fight a war in the Pacific. Now, the first thing we have here is we have the Philippine Islands, where the United States was given a bloody nose. And incidentally, the famous 4th Marine Regiment from Shanghai, they were called Shanghai Marines, they were pulled out of Shanghai, China in 1941, and they were shipped into the Philippines. And then their responsibility, after the Japanese had invaded the island, their responsibility and obligation was to defend the island of Corregidor, which is located in the Philippine Islands. It's in Manila Bay. And if you go back to your Spanish-American War, this is the famous saying of Admiral Dewey, "Damn the torpedoes, Dewey," full speed ahead, as he entered the Bay of the Philippines. And that was defended by Corregidor. Corregidor was like the bottleneck. And you had to go by Corregidor to get into Manila Bay. And of course, Manila, the capital of the Philippines, that was part of their objective. So the responsibility of the Marine Corps was Corregidor. And I'd like to point out to you, one of the last defensive positions in the Philippine Islands to fall to the Japanese was the island of Corregidor. And it was defended by the 1st Marine Regiment, known as China Marines. And to a man, they were taken prisoner. And then the Marine Corps rebuilt, put their strength in what we call the 1st Marine Corps Division, and they were committed to the island of Guadalcanal. Now, the reason Guadalcanal was so important to the Pacific Campaign and to the Australian government was the fact that, if we can get a close-up here, you have Australia, and then right at Australia, you have Guadalcanal. And the Japanese were building an airfield in Guadalcanal. And I know Marines and many of my mentors were of that famous corps, the 1st Marine Division. And at the time, we've heard the Marines such as Chesty Puller. He was the regimental commander of the 1st Marines. And that was the 1st Marine Regiment, the 1st Marine Division. And then you had the famous name Carlson, Carlson's Raiders. And many fellows, there's not too many around these days, but when they'll tell you they were a member of the Red Diamond, that tells you they were a Raider. Tough outfit, tough men, 1st Marine Division. And then we had Carlson Raiders, the famous colonel from China who formed the Raiders, convinced Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, to form 2 Raider battalions. One was the 1st and 2nd. The 2nd was headed up by General Carlson, Carlson's Raiders from Macon Island. And the 2nd was headed up by Red Mike Edson. And he had the 1st Marine Raider Battalion. And they outdid themselves as Marines, and they defended Guadalcanal. And when things got real tough, these Marines, you could rely on them. They defended Henderson Field. They kept Henderson Field. And this was a vocal point that once the Marine Corps took the thing, took the airfield, the Marine Air Wing came in, the Navy came in, and they flew their aircraft out of there. And they didn't have to go through. So when the aircraft carriers in the fleet had to leave Arnbottom Bay, they turned around and they left, and the Marine Corps were like, oh, I don't want to say it, it's on the air, so I can't say it, but they were like fatherless. They didn't have a mama, they didn't have a papa, they didn't have a Navy, they didn't have anything. The only thing we had was the Marine Corps. And they kept the island. And in turn, Edson's Raiders kept the airfield, and Henderson Field became a very vocal point in winning the campaign. And the reason they were defending it because Japan was building, or the Japanese Imperial Army was building an airfield there, and they had to, they were a threat to the Australians. So the Marine Corps came up and took it and took the island. And you know, I like to point out to you, especially in these times when people are running around and many people are being made hysterical due to the virus and the disease that we now have thanks to the Chinese. Some people object to it, but I say they gave it to us. A lot of people forget. We fought a war with China in 1950. A lot of good men and women died at the hands of the Chinese. And now they're back at an old game. But the important thing here is the fact that we defeated them then and we're going to defeat them now. But what I wanted to say was we had Marines on Guadalcanal, and they must have had every disease going. You only had to be on the island a very few weeks before you developed malaria. There was typhoid. Just about, you name the disease, they had it. Each man must have had 5 diseases. And they fought a battle and they won a war. And I can remember talking to some of my mentors that would tell me that we're at Guadalcanal and we're now going into Okinawa, or at Okinawa, said that when they invaded Okinawa, they still had the malaria they caught in Guadalcanal. And then when the Japanese surrendered, a lot of these Marines went back to China and became the second Marines to become what we call China Marines. It's an honor to be a China Marine. So this is what we had, and it was a very, very serious situation. But the point we want to make out here is the fact that the Marine Corps, on today, August 7th, invaded Guadalcanal. And the first island they took was Tulagi, and that was taken by Carlson's Raiders. And it's funny, and as advanced as this general was, this Marine, a lot of his policies are being used today, such as a lot of Marines now, every outfit or every squad or every platoon has snipers. The old Marine Corps squad, we didn't have snipers. On Guadalcanal, they made snipers. The Raiders had snipers, and their rifle, their favorite rifle, was the Springfield, 1903 Springfield. And many Marines, though the Grand, the M1, was available, Marines that invaded Guadalcanal outside of Raiders, they had the 1903 bolt-action Springfield rifle. This is what they had. And here again, if you look, here it is, the Pacific Ocean, and then you go in and you see a lot of familiar names. The Solomon Islands, you have Rendova, you have the Marshall Islands. It came much, much later was the invasion of Iwo Jima, which is a Marine Corps staple, and I'll show you the photograph. And as important it was, and as many lives we've lost, Guadalcanal is the battle that turned the tide in the Pacific. Guadalcanal is where we went from a United States Marine Corps and the United States government, who was on the defensive. We turned around, and at Guadalcanal, the Marine Corps turned it into an offensive. And they took the island. And like I say, we talked today about diseases and everything, but when these Marines left Guadalcanal, every one of them had 5, 7 diseases. And this is what they lived with each and every day. And they carried it through the Pacific. And if you had malaria, maybe they put you to bed and they give you quinine, and that was another thing. The quinine was short because the quinine is grown, it's from a tree, and it's grown in South America, and they were short of it, so they developed a pill called Adabrin. The only thing about Adabrin was if you took the pill and you took it long enough, it changed the pigment of your skin from white to yellow. So a lot of these fellas noticed all of a sudden their skin, they were turning yellow. And it was from the Adabrin. And the reason they took Adabrin was there was a shortage of quinine. Quinine's a medication and helps prevent malaria. And it's used in today's virus. And there's quite a few disputes about it. But I'll put my money with quinine and fighting this disease. And that's another thing. We can't let a disease defeat the spirit of the American people. We can't keep people cooped up all their lives with directives coming from people that they don't even know what it is to buy a quart of milk. And I'd like to show you something that, this is a Union Jack that's obsolete now, but was flown on American sailing ships. And it was called what they call today the Union Jack. And I'd like to show it to you. Because it had the American spirit, which we still have today, in spite of the attitudes of some people, not only in Simsbury, but elsewhere in Connecticut. That was the Union Jack. And then it was changed to 48 stars. And the Union Jack is flown at the bow of every United States ship, military, that's in port. When they come into port, the flag from the mast comes down. The flag on what they call the fantail, the end of the ship, that goes up, and the flag for the Union Jack on the bow of the ship goes up. And it's a blue field with all the states on it. And that's the Union Jack of the United States. Now, just briefly, I'd like to more or less go into a poster that I had made up, and then I have it on my car. And oddly enough, it's humorous in the sense because I take it with a grin that this sign that's on my automobile has been stolen twice and has been replaced by me twice. And it's a sign that I carry on my automobile, on the doors, and it says, "The proud, the few, the Marines support all police officers." Think about it. Think about it. Without the law, there is no United States. What was the first thing our Congress or our forefathers did? They formed a Constitution. And I'm not going to judge one or two by all or all by one or two. They all, police officers, deserve our respect. And I'll say it again. The proud, the few, the Marines support all our police officers. And these Johnny-come-latelys that want to change things, they're outdated. We're geared for change. That's what our Constitution is all about. But we have to respect our people that devote their career and their life to the laws of the United States of America. So I urge you not to be taken in by these Johnny-come-latelys that want to change everything. And I'd like to point out, I think if you go and look at the vote in the Senate, they voted against these police officers. If you look at the vote in the House of Representatives, John Hampton, ask him how he voted. His Democratic Party adopted this, more or less these rules, or I call them very, very harsh laws against police officers. Why should a policeman more or less jeopardize his family and himself and everything he worked for because somebody says he's made a mistake? There are no, this is the United States. Everybody has a right. And like it was said many times when I was a youngster, and I used to say, you know, freedom and freedom of speech, I was told you can't holler fire in the theater, and a person's fist stops at a person's face. And these people that go up, or these abusers that go up, and they feel that they have the right to call down a policeman in public, they have no right. What right do they have to do that? There's no excuse. And this is what's going on in our community. And it's being led by the wrong people. And I've heard and I've read, and I understand that it's being developed by Marxists, communists. Let me remind you, 1950, we went to war against the communists. We fought the communists under Harry Truman. And incidentally, Harry Truman cared about us just as well as anyone else. And we were in China, Harry Truman didn't tell us to wear masks. And that's pro and con. And that's still out. And that's another thing we have to look at as citizens. Are we receiving the right information, or is it screwed, where people are changing it, and they're reporting it for their benefit? We can't keep our government closed. We can't deny people the right to work. Or deny people their lifestyle. It's America. We don't have a room for a dictator. Why do we need one now? And this is my opinion. We have a constitution. And I'm told, and I'm beginning to think that it's a fallacy, the Connecticut State Constitution is stronger than the United States Constitution. If this is the fact, why do we have a dictator? Why don't we have representative government anymore? Why are people closing things without the proper authority? And it's wrong. This is America. And that more or less concludes my meeting, or my little talk today with you. And I want to thank you very much for allowing me into your homes. And I think it's very important that we keep our Constitution, we keep our Constitution, state of Connecticut, and we keep our Constitution, the United States government, and not to let ambitious politicians try to take our government from us. And these laws are especially the law this law with the policemen, that's not constitutional. You can't do that. Are we going to have a mob running Connecticut? It's time to stop. It's time to speak out. So thank you once again for allowing me into your homes. Bob Kalechman for Millennium. And God bless America.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.